Some wounds never announce themselves. They don't cause collapse, they cause competence. The person who never misses a deadline, who stays calm in every crisis but their own, who has built a life that looks, from the outside, entirely put together. No one suspects the ground beneath them is not solid, because it has never once visibly cracked. This is the story of trauma that learned to hide inside achievement, and the quiet signs it leaves behind. The body that never rests. There is a stillness that looks like peace, but isn't. It looks like someone sitting quietly, breathing evenly, appearing entirely at ease. But underneath, something is still running, a low, constant hum of readiness, as if some part of them is always waiting for a sound that hasn't come yet. This is the first sign, and often the hardest to notice, because it has no obvious name. It doesn't look like fear. It looks like alertness, like responsibility, like simply being someone who stays on top of things. They check the door twice, not because they're afraid, but because it feels careless not to. They finish tasks early, not from ambition, but because leaving something unfinished creates a discomfort they can't quite explain. They rarely nap, rarely linger, rarely let an afternoon simply pass without shape or purpose. Ask them if they feel anxious, and many would say no, genuinely. Because this isn't the anxiety of racing thoughts or visible panic. It is quieter than that, and older. It has been present so long it no longer registers as a feeling at all. It has become the baseline, the water they've always swum in, indistinguishable from the water itself. This is what researchers mean when they describe trauma as something that lives in the body, not just in memory. A body that once needed to stay alert to survive. A chaotic household, an unpredictable caregiver, an environment where danger could arrive without warning, does not simply forget that training once the danger is gone. It keeps scanning, it keeps bracing. Long after the original threat has disappeared, the body continues rehearsing its readiness, because some deep, old part of it has never received the memo that it is safe now. And so rest becomes strange, almost unreachable. Not because they don't want it, but because stillness, to a nervous system trained for vigilance, can feel like exposure. If nothing is being monitored, if nothing is being managed, what might slip through unnoticed? The mind fills the silence with productivity instead, because productivity feels safer than idleness. A full calendar is, in its own way, a kind of armor. This is the quiet cruelty of high-functioning trauma. The very vigilance that once kept a person safe becomes, later, the thing that keeps them exhausted. They are not lazy. They are not simply type A. They are, often, still running from something that stopped chasing them a long time ago. A body caught in a loop it never consciously agreed to, mistaking constant motion for safety, when what it is actually doing is refusing, gently and relentlessly, to ever fully put its guard down. Where composure was born. Composure, like most survival skills, is learned early, and rarely by choice. Picture a child growing up in a home where unpredictability was the weather they lived under. Perhaps a parent's mood shifted without warning. Perhaps love arrived inconsistently, generous one day, absent the next. Perhaps there was simply no room for anyone else's chaos, because someone else's, a parent's stress, a sibling's crisis, a family's quiet unraveling, always came first. In this kind of environment, a child learns quickly that falling apart is a luxury they cannot afford. There is no one available to catch them if they do. So instead of collapsing, they adapt. They become watchful. They learn to read a room before entering it. The tone of a voice, the tightness of a jaw, the particular silence that precedes an outburst. They become fluent in managing an environment they have no real power over, because managing it, even slightly, feels safer than being at its mercy. This is where composure is born, not as a personality trait, but as a strategy. Staying calm becomes a way of staying safe. Being helpful becomes a way of staying needed and therefore protected. Excelling, at school, at responsibility, at being the strong one, becomes a way of proving worth in a world that never fully guaranteed it. Crucially, this strategy works. It earns praise. So mature for their age. Such an old soul. Never any trouble. The child receives, in these words, a confirmation that their strategy is correct, that competence is what makes them valuable. what keeps them included, what makes them lovable, in a world that has not always felt reliably so. But what looks like maturity from the outside is often, quietly, a child doing the emotional labor no child should have to carry, managing not just their own feelings, but the emotional climate of the people around them. This is sometimes called parentification, the reversal of a role that should never have needed reversing, where the child becomes the steadying force for adults who were meant to steady them. The tragedy of this kind of origin is that it rarely feels like trauma while it's happening. There is no single dramatic event to point to. There is only a slow, cumulative education in self-reliance, an early and thorough lesson that says, no one is coming, so you'd better learn to hold yourself together. And they do, remarkably well. So well that decades later, the holding never fully stops, because no one ever taught them it was safe to set it down. The nervous system's long memory, what is often mistaken for a personality trait, is, more precisely, a nervous system still operating under outdated instructions. Psychologists describe high-functioning trauma as trauma that does not interrupt daily life in visible ways. No missed work, no obvious breakdown, but instead reshapes the internal experience of that life. The person functions, they achieve, they meet expectations, often exceeding them. And underneath all of it, the body remains in a state researchers call hypervigilance, a nervous system stuck slightly, persistently, in the on position. This connects to what is known as the window of tolerance, the psychological range within which a person can experience stress and still feel grounded, present, and able to think clearly. For someone shaped by chronic early instability, this window is often narrower than it should be, and harder to stay inside. Small stresses can trigger disproportionate internal alarm, not because the person is overreacting, but because their baseline threshold for danger was calibrated years ago, in a different, less safe context. This is also where the science of the fawn and freeze responses becomes relevant. Alongside the more familiar fight or flight, some nervous systems, particularly those shaped in environments where confrontation or escape wasn't possible, develop a third and fourth strategy, appeasement, and a kind of functional freeze, where the body keeps moving, keeps performing, while some deeper layer remains quietly locked in place. This is why so many high-functioning people describe feeling, even during ordinary days, a strange disconnection, as though they are watching themselves perform competence from slightly outside their own body. Polyvagal theory, developed by researcher Stephen Porges, offers language for this. A nervous system's sense of safety is not primarily determined by rational assessment, but by a subconscious, continuous scanning process he calls neuroception. A person can know, intellectually, that they are safe, that the unpredictable household is long gone, that the danger has passed, while their body, operating on older data, continues to behave as though it hasn't. This explains why insight alone rarely resolves the pattern. Understanding why the vigilance developed does not automatically switch it off, because the vigilance was never a belief to begin with. It is a physiological habit, encoded before language, and it requires more than logic to unlearn. It requires, over time, new experiences of safety, repeated often enough and gently enough for the nervous system to slowly, cautiously, begin revising what it expects. When the mask begins to slip there, is often a specific moment, not always dramatic, but distinct, when the performance falters. A moment when the body, so long asked to hold everything together, simply cannot hold quite as much as before. Sometimes it looks like unexplained tears in a parking lot after an ordinary day. Sometimes it is a sudden inability to get out of bed, despite nothing being technically wrong. Sometimes it is subtler still, a growing irritability, a fatigue that sleep doesn't touch, a sense of going through the motions of a life that used to feel, at minimum, manageable. This is often misread, by the person experiencing it, and sometimes by those around them, as decline, as something breaking that was previously fine. But more accurately, this is often not breaking. It is thawing. It is the nervous system, after years of relentless readiness, finally encountering enough safety or enough exhaustion to loosen its grip slightly, and in doing so, allowing feelings that were held at bay for years to finally surface. This moment is frightening precisely because it contradicts a deeply held belief that falling apart, even briefly, is dangerous. The old logic resurfaces immediately. If I stop holding this together, what happens? Who will catch it? Who will catch me? For someone who learned early that no one would, this question is not rhetorical. It is existential. And yet, this is often where healing quietly begins, not in the composure, but in its cracking. When a person finally says, to a friend, a partner, a therapist, "I don't think I'm actually okay," something shifts. Not because the problem is solved, but because, for perhaps the first time, the weight is not being carried entirely alone. Healing here rarely looks like transformation. It looks like small, uncomfortable permissions. Permission to cancel plans without a detailed justification. Permission to say, "I don't have the capacity for this right now." Permission to let someone see the tired version, the uncertain version, the version that doesn't have it all figured out. Each of these acts, however small, offers the nervous system new evidence, proof, gathered slowly, that vulnerability does not always lead to abandonment, that the world can in fact hold more than it once did. This is not a single moment of arrival. It is a gradual, uneven process, 2 steps toward openness, 1 step back into old armor, repeated patiently over time. But each repetition slowly rewires what safety means. Not the absence of feeling, not endless control, but the felt, embodied sense that even without the mask, they are still, in fact, safe. The life beneath the function, high functioning, was never who they were. It was who they had to become. A shape the self took on to survive an environment that demanded steadiness before it ever offered safety. It was intelligent. It was resourceful. It kept a young, unprotected person intact when little else could. But like any survival shape, it was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be temporary architecture, scaffolding, not skin. Beneath the function is someone who has simply never been given permission to be anything less than capable. Someone who has confused being needed with being loved, and stillness with danger. Someone who is tired, not from any one event, but from years spent holding a version of calm that was never quite real, only well rehearsed. To let that function soften, even briefly, is not the same as falling apart. It is, instead, a kind of homecoming, a slow return to a self that does not have to perform steadiness in order to be worthy of care. There is nothing broken here that needs fixing, only an old strategy, finally recognized for what it was, not a flaw, but a survival, so thorough it became invisible even to the one living inside it. Somewhere beneath the achievements, the composure, the reliability that never seemed to waver, there is still a person who simply wants to rest without earning it first. Not gone, only waiting, the way anything essential tends to wait, for a life finally safe enough to let them stop holding on so tightly and simply be held.